Welcome, friend, to another journey together. We're so glad to have you here. Tonight, you will uncover life-changing Zen wisdom that has the power to set you completely free from the mental patterns that keep you trapped in endless loops of worry and restlessness. If you'd like, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. I'm going to share with you a collection of extraordinary Buddhist stories that contain the hidden keys to true liberation. Each tale holds ancient secrets about breaking free from the chains of overthinking, the prison of perfectionism, and the exhausting cycle of always wanting more. These profound teachings have transformed countless lives across centuries, offering genuine freedom from the mental suffering that keeps so many of us awake at night. These aren't just stories, but carefully preserved wisdom from masters who discovered something beautiful, that the freedom you're seeking isn't found by changing your external world, but by transforming your relationship with your internal one. As Buddha taught, three things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Tonight, you'll discover truths about your own mind that can change everything. As we move through these remarkable tales together, you'll feel something powerful beginning to shift within you. The tight grip of mental tension will start to release. The constant need to control and fix will begin to dissolve. You'll find yourself naturally settling into a state of deep understanding and genuine rest, the kind that comes from finally being free. So let yourself sink in completely now. Allow your body to be fully supported. Take one deep breath with me, and as you release it, know that you're about to receive teachings that hold the power to set you free from patterns that have held you captive for far too long. Let us explore a story about the liberation found in losing what we think defines us. In ancient China, there lived a Zen master named Jikaku, who had spent 40 years in deep meditation and study. His reputation for wisdom spread across many provinces, and students traveled great distances through mountain passes and river valleys to learn from him. The monastery where he taught was renowned throughout the land, its gardens meticulously maintained, its halls filled with the soft murmur of contemplation. One morning, Jikaku woke up and could not remember his own name. He sat quietly for hours on his meditation cushion, searching his mind with growing bewilderment, but found only emptiness where his identity once lived. The weight of his reputation, his years of study, his accumulated knowledge, all of it seemed to have vanished like morning mist. Panicking, he called his senior disciple, a man who had served him faithfully for many years. "I have lost myself," Jikaku confessed, his voice trembling. "I cannot remember who I am." The great teacher Jikaku seems to have disappeared entirely. The disciple looked into his master's confused eyes and smiled with deep understanding. He bowed deeply, lower than he had ever bowed before. "Master, this is wonderful news. Today, you can finally begin to teach." Confused but trusting his disciple's wisdom, Jikaku spent that day interacting with visitors as a nameless person. Without the weight of his reputation pressing down upon his shoulders, without the burden of being the great master Jikaku, he spoke with unprecedented freshness. His words carried a lightness they had never possessed before. Students found themselves leaning forward, captivated by something entirely new in his teaching, a quality of authentic presence that had been hidden beneath layers of accumulated identity. By evening, his memory returned completely, like water flowing back into a dried riverbed. But something had fundamentally shifted within him. He had tasted the freedom of existing without the prison of identity, and the flavor was sweeter than anything he had ever known. From that day forward, Jikaku would periodically introduce himself to new students with different names, sometimes calling himself Nobody in Particular or the One Who Forgot. His teaching became legendary, not for its profundity, but for its startling simplicity. When asked about enlightenment, he would say with twinkling eyes, "First, become so much yourself that you disappear entirely. Then you can be of some use to others." The Buddha once said, "You are what you think. All that you are arises from your thoughts. With your thoughts, you make your world." What emerges from this story is a profound understanding of how our attachment to identity creates suffering. We spend our lives constructing elaborate self-concepts, our roles, achievements, reputations, and stories about who we are, then exhaust ourselves defending and maintaining these mental constructions. Why do we cling so desperately to our sense of self? Zen Buddhism explains that the ego mind constantly seeks security through definition. We believe that if we can just establish who we are clearly enough, if we can accumulate enough accomplishments or recognition, we will finally feel safe and complete. But this very effort to solidify the self creates a prison of expectations and limitations. Consider how much mental energy you spend each day maintaining your various identities. The successful professional who must never appear incompetent, the good parent who cannot show weakness, the spiritual seeker who must seem enlightened, the helpful friend who cannot say no. Each role becomes a cage, constraining our natural responses and authentic expression. The great Zen teacher Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." When Jikaku lost his name, he gained direct access to his original nature, the awareness that exists before all labels and concepts. This is what Zen calls our original face, the essential being that needs no definition or achievement to be complete. In our modern world, we are constantly being asked to define ourselves. Social media profiles, job interviews, dating apps, networking events, all require us to package our identity into digestible categories. But notice what happens when you try to relax this constant self-definition. Perhaps in moments of deep absorption in nature, creative work, or intimate conversation, the sense of being a separate self temporarily dissolves. In these moments, life flows more naturally, spontaneously, joyfully. The Buddha understood that what we call self is actually a constantly changing stream of thoughts, sensations, emotions, and perceptions. There is no solid, unchanging entity at the center of this stream. Recognizing this truth doesn't diminish us. It liberates us from the exhausting project of maintaining a fixed identity. Zen Master Dogen wrote, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. This forgetting is not unconsciousness, but a kind of awakened selflessness that allows life to express itself through us without the interference of ego-based agendas." Tonight, as you rest in the quiet darkness, can you sense the awareness that witnesses all your thoughts and experiences? This witnessing presence needs no name, no story, no accomplishments, to validate its existence. It simply is, vast and peaceful and free. As the Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. Let us now turn to a tale about the futility of seeking what is already present. Young May had studied with her Zen teacher for 3 years in a mountain monastery surrounded by ancient pine trees and crystal-clear streams. She had mastered meditation postures until she could sit motionless for hours, memorized hundreds of traditional koans until she could recite them perfectly, and followed every rule of monastic life with unwavering precision. The other students admired her discipline. The senior monks praised her dedication. Yet despite all her accomplishments, she felt no closer to understanding than when she first arrived as a confused young woman seeking answers. Finally, her frustration reached a breaking point. One autumn morning, with golden leaves falling around the temple courtyard, she approached her teacher, Master Lin, and demanded with unusual boldness, "When will I achieve enlightenment? I have done everything correctly. I have studied harder than anyone. I have followed every instruction. When will I be rewarded with the understanding I seek?" Master Lin looked at her with genuine surprise, as if she had just asked about something completely foreign. "Enlightenment? I've never heard of such a thing. What is that? Could you explain this concept to me?" May was stunned into silence. The question she had been certain would elicit wise guidance instead met with apparent ignorance. But you're enlightened. Everyone says so. Students come from distant provinces to study with you because of your enlightenment. You teach enlightenment. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Master Lin replied with complete sincerity, adjusting his simple brown robes. "I just sit when I sit, walk when I walk, eat when I eat, sleep when I'm tired. Some people find this interesting to watch, but I wouldn't call it anything special. It's simply what humans do naturally." May felt her carefully constructed spiritual worldview beginning to crumble. Then why do I feel so lost? Why am I searching so desperately? There must be something I need to attain, some state I need to reach. "Ah," said Master Lin, his eyes brightening with interest. "Now you're asking something worth exploring. Who is this I that feels lost? Can you introduce me to her? I'd like to meet this seeker you speak of." May opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. She tried again to locate this I that was seeking, but it seemed to slip away like water through her fingers. Every time she attempted to pin down the seeker, it dissolved under examination. I am," she began, but each attempt felt hollow and incomplete. "The one who seeks enlightenment and the one who could become enlightened," Master Lin asked gently. "Are they the same person? Or perhaps there are two of you? I'm getting confused about how many people I'm speaking with." As May contemplated this seemingly simple question, something profound shifted within her consciousness. The seeker and the sought, the student and the goal, the questioner and the answer. All these apparent dualities collapsed into each other, leaving only the simple reality of sitting in a garden with her teacher, watching clouds drift across the vast autumn sky. She never stopped what might be called seeking, but was never again troubled by not finding. The search had revealed itself to be its own fulfillment, like a circle that discovers it has no beginning or end. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, what we think, we become. What we feel, we attract. What we imagine, we create. This ancient wisdom illuminates the paradox of spiritual seeking. The very act of searching for enlightenment often reinforces the illusion that we lack something essential. Why do we become trapped in endless spiritual seeking? Zen Buddhism reveals that our minds are conditioned to view happiness, peace, and fulfillment as future achievements rather than present realities. We approach our spiritual life like a business project, accumulating knowledge, techniques, and experiences, believing that enough accumulation will eventually produce the desired result. This consumer mentality toward awakening creates what Zen calls spiritual materialism, treating enlightenment as another object to be acquired rather than recognizing it as our natural state temporarily obscured by seeking itself. The irony is profound. We search everywhere for what we already are, like someone wearing glasses while frantically looking for their glasses. Consider how this pattern shows up in your daily life. Perhaps you think, I'll be happy when I get that promotion, find the right relationship, achieve my ideal weight, finish this project, or master this spiritual practice. Each of these thoughts reinforces the belief that contentment exists somewhere other than here and now. But notice what happens when you achieve these goals. Often, the seeking mind simply creates new conditions for future happiness. The great Zen master Bankei taught, "The unborn Buddha mind is already complete and perfect. You are trying to polish a mirror that is already perfectly clear." This teaching points to the fundamental misunderstanding underlying all seeking, the belief that we are broken and need fixing rather than whole, and needing only recognition of our wholeness. In our achievement-oriented culture, this message can sound strange or even dangerous. Shouldn't we strive to improve ourselves? The difference lies in the motivation. When improvement arises from a sense of inadequacy and desperate seeking, it creates suffering. When it arises from joy and natural expression, it creates fulfillment. It's the difference between running away from something and dancing towards something. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck observed, "Enlightenment is not something you achieve. It's the absence of something. All your life you have been going forward after something, pursuing some goal. Enlightenment is dropping all that." This dropping is not giving up or becoming passive. It's releasing the exhausting effort to become other than what you already are. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." This doesn't mean we should avoid learning, growing, or seeking to understand more deeply. Rather, it suggests that true peace is not the result of any external achievement, but the recognition of what has always been present beneath our seeking. Tonight, as you notice any restlessness or dissatisfaction arising in your mind, can you ask May's question? Who is the one that feels incomplete? Can you find this seeker, or does it dissolve under gentle investigation? As the Buddha taught, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Perhaps what we're truly seeking is simply the courage to accept ourselves exactly as we are, right here, right now. Our next story reveals the profound emptiness that underlies all apparent fullness. A wealthy grain merchant named Chen Lu traveled regularly between villages throughout the fertile river valleys of ancient China. His ox cart was always loaded with the finest rice and wheat, golden kernels that caught the sunlight and promised nourishment to families throughout the region. Chen Lu was known far and wide for his sharp business mind and his remarkable ability to profit from any transaction. His reputation preceded him to every market town, where merchants respected his skill and customers trusted his grain. One particularly warm day, Chen Lu encountered a peculiar sight along the dusty road between villages. A monk sat calmly by the roadside next to an empty ox cart, having arranged himself exactly as if he were conducting business. The monk had set up a small area with a worn blanket and a simple wooden bowl, appearing for all the world like any other traveling merchant. But his cart contained nothing, literally nothing but air and shadows. Chen Lu pulled his heavily loaded cart to a stop, curiosity overcoming his usual hurry to reach the next market before his competitors. "What are you selling, Venerable One?" he asked with barely concealed amusement, gesturing toward the conspicuously empty cart. "The same thing you are," replied the monk with perfect calmness, not even looking up from his meditation posture. Chen Lu burst into laughter. "Nonsense! My cart is filled to overflowing with grain, the finest rice and wheat in the province. Yours is completely empty. There's nothing there at all." The monk finally raised his eyes and gazed thoughtfully at Chen Lu's heavy, creaking cart. "Tell me, friend, what will remain of your grain in 1 year?" Chen Lu's laughter faded as he considered the question seriously. "Well, it will be eaten, I suppose. People will cook it into meals and consume it. And your profit from selling it, spent or invested in more grain to be sold and eaten in turn. And the people who eat your grain?" Chen Lu grew quiet, understanding slowly dawning like sunrise over mountains. The permanence he thought he was dealing in was revealed as a series of temporary arrangements, everything flowing through temporary forms without lasting solidity. "I sell emptiness directly," the monk continued with gentle kindness. "You sell it indirectly, dressed up in the appearance of substantial goods. But we are both in the same business, reminding people that everything passes through them without being owned. Everything they think they possess will eventually return to emptiness. The only difference is that your method involves more steps, more effort, and consequently more suffering for those who cling to the temporary appearances." Chen Lu stared at his cart full of grain, as if seeing it for the first time. The weight of it suddenly felt absurd. All this tremendous effort to move temporary forms from one place to another, like rearranging clouds in the sky. The entire enterprise of accumulation and transaction revealed itself as an elaborate dance with emptiness. "How much for a bag of your nothing?" Chen Lu asked with newfound seriousness, realizing he was in the presence of something far more valuable than grain. "For you, free of charge," the monk smiled. "You've been buying it your whole life without knowing it. Every transaction you've ever completed has been an exchange of temporary arrangements. Now you simply see it clearly." Chen Lu's grain business continued as before, but his entire relationship to it transformed completely. He became known throughout the region as the merchant who somehow made everyone feel lighter after dealing with him, though no one could quite explain why. As the Buddha observed, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing the fundamental emptiness that underlies all apparent solidity. What we call things are actually processes, temporary arrangements of energy and matter that arise, persist briefly, and dissolve back into the vast emptiness from which they came. Why does this truth about emptiness feel so unsettling to our minds? Zen Buddhism explains that we suffer because we constantly try to grasp the ungraspable, to make permanent what is inherently transitory. We build our sense of security on the accumulation of things, relationships, achievements, and identities, not recognizing that all of these are like clouds, beautiful and real in their temporary manifestation, but ultimately insubstantial. Consider your own relationship to possessions and achievements. How much mental energy do you spend acquiring, maintaining, protecting, and worrying about losing the things you own? Your bank account, your reputation, your body, your relationships. All of these are like Chen-Lu's grain, real and valuable in their temporary form, but ultimately returning to emptiness. This recognition doesn't diminish the practical value of these things or suggest we should become careless with them. Rather, it frees us from the suffering that comes from clinging to them as if they were permanent sources of security. When we understand that everything is essentially on loan from the universe, we can enjoy and use what comes to us without the anxiety of permanent ownership. The Japanese aesthetic principle of mono, no aware, captures this beautifully, the bittersweet awareness of the impermanence of all things. Cherry blossoms are most beautiful precisely because they bloom briefly and then fall. Their transience doesn't make them less meaningful, it makes them infinitely precious. Zen Master Dogen taught, time is not separate from you, and as you are present, time does not go away. When we truly understand emptiness, we realize that the present moment is the only thing we can ever actually possess, and even that is constantly flowing and changing. This leads to a paradox. By giving up our attempt to possess anything permanently, we gain access to everything temporarily. In our consumer culture, this teaching offers profound liberation. The endless cycle of desire, acquisition, temporary satisfaction, and renewed desire reveals itself as fundamentally empty, not in a nihilistic sense, but in a liberating one. We can participate fully in life's experiences without being enslaved by the need to possess them permanently. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." This wisdom points to the abundant nature of emptiness itself. When we stop trying to hoard temporary things, we discover an infinite capacity for generosity and joy. Tonight, as you notice any anxiety about things you might lose or things you wish you could gain, can you remember the merchant's empty cart? Can you sense the lightness available when you release the burden of permanent ownership? As the Buddha taught, in the end, these things matter most. How well did you love? How fully did you live? How deeply did you let go? In letting go, we discover that what we thought was emptiness is actually the fullness of life itself. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the difference between copying forms and embodying essence. The ancient sutras of a remote mountain monastery had begun to fade with the passage of centuries, their delicate rice paper yellowed by time and moisture, precious black ink bleeding into ghostly grey shadows. These sacred texts contained teachings that had been carefully preserved for generations, wisdom that connected the current community of monks to an unbroken lineage stretching back to the Buddha himself. The abbot, a man who understood the weight of this responsibility, decided that new copies must be made immediately, copies that would last for centuries to come and preserve these teachings for future generations. He sent messengers to the surrounding provinces with a request for the finest scribe in the entire region, someone whose skill with brush and ink was legendary. After many weeks of searching, a man named Hakun arrived at the monastery gates. He was not what the monks had expected. Rather than a young, energetic scribe with boxes of supplies, Hakun was old and deeply quiet, carrying only a small hemp satchel containing brushes worn smooth by decades of use, a simple inkstone, and a single roll of blank paper that seemed almost luminous in its purity. The abbot led Hakun to a serene, isolated room where golden light filtered through paper screens and the sound of distant temple bells created an atmosphere of perfect contemplation. "Here is the original sutra," the abbot said with reverence, gesturing to the precious text resting on a wooden stand. "We will bring you food and water regularly. Please, venerable scribe, take all the time you need to create a perfect copy." Hakun bowed deeply, entered the room with mindful steps, and gently slid the paper screen closed behind him. A week passed. The abbot, curious about the progress, carefully peeked into the room through a small gap in the screen. Hakun was not writing. He sat in perfect meditation posture, his eyes closed, his breathing so quiet it was barely perceptible. The new paper remained pristine and untouched, white as fresh snow. He must be preparing his mind and spirit for this sacred task, the abbot thought with understanding, and left him undisturbed. A full month passed. The abbot looked again with growing curiosity. The inkstone was completely dry, the brushes untouched and arranged exactly as they had been on the first day. Still, Hakun sat in profound stillness. The abbot's curiosity was now mixed with concern, but he reminded himself that true masters work in mysterious ways. After 3 months of absolute silence from the room, the abbot's patience finally wore thin. He slid open the door with perhaps more force than necessary and entered with poorly concealed frustration. "Master Hakun," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled exasperation. "You were hired to copy our precious sutra. The ink remains dry, the paper is still blank, and you appear to have done nothing at all. Have you made any progress whatsoever on the task we requested?" Hakun slowly opened his eyes. They were as clear and deep as a mountain lake that has never been disturbed by wind. He looked directly at the abbot with profound compassion, then turned his gaze to the old faded sutra resting on its wooden stand. "Venerable abbot," Hakun said, his voice carrying the quality of wind through pine trees. "The words written on that paper are like a finger pointing at the moon. For these 3 months, I have been looking directly at the moon itself. To copy the finger would be simple work for any clerk with basic skills. But my task, the task you truly need completed, was to ensure that the moon itself was fully seen and completely understood." He rose slowly from his meditation cushion and gestured with infinite gentleness to the seemingly empty room. "The truest sutra cannot be written with brush and ink. It is inscribed in the silence that fills this space. It lives in the light filtering through these screens. It breathes in the mind that has become empty of all striving and grasping. I have spent these months inscribing this true sutra onto the very air itself, creating a transmission more perfect than any words could ever be. He paused, his eyes twinkling with deep joy. "Tell me, Venerable Abbot, can you read what I have written?" The abbot stood in stunned silence, suddenly realizing that Hakoon had not been idle for a single moment. He had been creating the most perfect copy imaginable, not a reproduction of symbols, but a living embodiment of the very emptiness and presence that all the written words were pointing toward. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. But when you observe and analyze and find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. This ancient wisdom illuminates our tendency to mistake the map for the territory, the description for the reality it describes. Why do we so often confuse form with essence? Zen Buddhism reveals that our minds naturally grasp onto concrete representations because they feel safer and more manageable than direct experience. Written teachings, rituals, techniques, and spiritual concepts give us something solid to hold on to in a world that is fundamentally fluid and mysterious. But this very grasping can prevent us from accessing the living reality that these forms are meant to transmit. Consider how this pattern manifests in your own spiritual or creative pursuits. Perhaps you collect books about meditation rather than sitting quietly. Maybe you learn about love through reading rather than opening your heart to those around you. Or you study techniques for happiness instead of simply noticing the joy that arises naturally in moments of presence. Each of these approaches has value, but they become obstacles when we mistake information for transformation. The great Zen teacher Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." Hakoon embodied this wisdom by rejecting the thought, "I must copy these words," in favor of seeing directly what the words were pointing toward. He understood that the highest teaching is not contained in concepts, but in the very awareness that perceives all concepts. In our information-saturated culture, this lesson feels particularly relevant. We have unprecedented access to spiritual teachings, psychological insights, and wisdom traditions from around the world. But information without integration creates what might be called spiritual indigestion, a bloated sense of knowing that actually distances us from direct understanding. The Buddha said, "All things arise and pass away. Be diligent in your practice." This diligence is not the accumulation of more knowledge or the perfection of techniques. True spiritual diligence lies in our willingness to sit in the silence between words, to rest in the space between thoughts, to abide in the awareness that witnesses all experiences without being captured by any of them. Zen Master Bankei expressed this beautifully. The unborn Buddha mind is already perfectly clear and pure. You are trying to polish a mirror that is already flawless. The true teaching is not something we need to acquire from outside ourselves. It is the recognition of what has always been present, the clear, aware emptiness in which all experiences arise and pass away. Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable stream of thoughts, plans, and memories that fill the mind, can you sense the vast silence in which they appear? This silence is not empty in a vacant way. It is vibrantly alive with potential, pregnant with understanding that needs no words. As the Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. The deepest wisdom often comes not through accumulation, but through the gradual release of everything unnecessary. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about the profound teaching that exists in the simplest moments. The old Zen master Jinnu was dying. For months, he had been confined to his bed in a small, sparse room overlooking the monastery's carefully tended garden. Outside his window, seasons changed with their eternal rhythm. Summer's intense green gave way to autumn's gold, then winter's stark beauty, and finally, spring's tender renewal. Through it all, Jin'u lay peacefully, his breathing growing shallower with each passing day. His disciples had gathered around him throughout these final months, hoping desperately for one last teaching, one final piece of wisdom that would guide them through the years to come. The air in the room felt heavy with expectation and barely contained grief. These devoted students had followed Jin'u for decades, studying his every gesture, memorizing his teachings, trying to understand the mysterious source of his profound peace. On what would be his final day, his senior disciple, a man who had served him faithfully for 40 years, knelt beside the narrow bed. This disciple had witnessed Jin'u teach thousands of students, had seen him guide seekers through the deepest questions of existence, had watched him demonstrate wisdom in countless ways, both subtle and profound. "Master," the senior disciple whispered, leaning close to Jin'u's ear, "you are leaving us soon. We can feel your spirit preparing for its journey. Please, before you go, share with us the most essential truth you have learned. What is the final teaching of Zen? What words will help us find our way without your guidance?" The other monks pressed closer, their faces etched with anticipation and sorrow. They expected perhaps a famous koan that would puzzle and inspire them for years. Maybe a profound verse about the nature of existence that they could recite in times of doubt. Or perhaps a cryptic phrase that would unlock some final mystery they had not yet penetrated. Master Jin'u's eyes, cloudy with age and approaching death, slowly fluttered open like butterfly wings, but he did not look at any of his devoted students. His weathered face turned toward the open window, and his nostrils flared slightly as he drew in the deepest breath his weakened lungs could manage. A faint smile touched his lips, as gentle as morning light on still water. He turned his head just slightly toward his students, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible, like leaves rustling in a distant breeze. "Do you smell?" he whispered with his final breath. "The rain coming." And then his eyes closed forever, his spirit dissolving back into the vast mystery from which all life emerges. The monks sat in stunned silence. The smell of rain? After all their years of deep study and spiritual discipline, this was the ultimate teaching? Some felt disappointed, others confused, a few even slightly betrayed. But the senior disciple remained kneeling beside his master's still form. Something in the simplicity of those final words called to him with unmistakable authority. Slowly, he closed his own eyes and breathed in deeply, just as Jin'u had done. And suddenly, he sensed it. The faint, earthy fragrance of ozone and moist dust that appears in the air just before a storm arrives. The entire world outside the room, a world they had completely forgotten in their grief and desperate seeking for profound teachings. In that moment of simple sensory awareness, the deepest understanding dawned. The final teaching was not a concept to be memorized or analyzed. It was an invitation to be fully present to the immediate, unfiltered reality of this very moment. To abandon the endless search for ultimate answers and simply awaken to the miracle of direct experience that is always available. A few moments later, the first drops of rain began to fall on the temple roof with soft, rhythmic music that seemed to confirm the master's final gift. The Buddha taught, "The past is gone, the future is not yet here, and if we do not go back to ourselves in the present moment, we cannot be in touch with life." Here we discover the ultimate simplicity that underlies all spiritual seeking. The recognition that wisdom is not found in complex teachings, but in the immediate intimacy with whatever is arising right now. Why do we overlook the profound teachings available in simple sensory experience? Zen Buddhism explains that our minds are addicted to complexity and constantly seeking something more dramatic or significant than what is actually present. We believe that true wisdom must be difficult to understand, that enlightenment requires years of study and mysterious insights. But the deepest teachings often come disguised as ordinary moments that we dismiss as insignificant. Think about your own relationship to the present moment. How often do you notice the quality of light in your room, the sounds surrounding you right now, the sensations in your body, or the rhythm of your breathing? These simple experiences are constantly offering teachings about impermanence, interconnection, and the miraculous nature of existence. But we miss them while searching for something more exotic or profound. The smell of rain represents all the subtle invitations to presence that life offers us continuously. The warmth of sunlight on your skin, the taste of water when you're truly thirsty, the sound of wind in trees, the feeling of your feet touching the ground. These experiences don't require interpretation or analysis. They simply ask us to be fully here with what is happening. Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "The present moment is the only time over which we have dominion." When Jin-U directed his students' attention to the approaching rain, he was pointing them toward their own capacity for immediate, direct awareness. This awareness doesn't need to be developed or improved. It simply needs to be recognized and trusted. In our achievement-oriented culture, this teaching can feel almost too simple to be valuable. We're conditioned to believe that anything worthwhile requires effort, complexity, and time to develop. But the deepest spiritual truths are often hidden in plain sight, available through the simple act of paying attention to what is already here. The Buddha said, "If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion." This happiness is not found in future attainments, but in the compassionate attention we bring to each moment of our experience. When we truly smell the rain, see the light, feel our breath, we touch something that needs no improvement or explanation. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, can you follow Jin-U's final teaching? Perhaps notice the weight of your body against the bed, the temperature of the air on your skin, or the sounds that surround you in the darkness. These simple experiences are offering the same profound teaching that took Jinnu 40 years to fully embody. The recognition that this moment, exactly as it is, contains everything we have ever been seeking. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within, do not seek it without. The rain is always coming if we have eyes to see and noses to smell. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a teaching about the futility of comparison and the trap of spiritual pride. This is shame on you. In the quiet corridors of a mountain monastery, an aging Zen master sat facing a monk who had come seeking guidance about his spiritual progress. The temple bells had just finished their evening call to meditation, and golden light filtered through the paper screens, casting gentle shadows on the worn wooden floors. The master, with eyes that had seen many seasons of seeking, looked at the earnest young monk before him. "How old are you?" the master inquired, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent in contemplation. 31, the monk replied, straightening his posture with a hint of pride in his maturity. The master's response came swiftly, like the crack of bamboo in winter wind. At 29, the Buddha had already realized enlightenment, and here you are, showing the same old face. The monk felt the sting of these words, but gathered his courage. Perhaps this elderly teacher was also caught in the trap of comparison. "How old is your reverence?" he asked, turning the question back upon his teacher. "Over 80, the master replied simply. Without hesitation, the monk seized his opportunity. "Shame on you," he declared, his voice echoing through the meditation hall. The master, far from being offended, broke into a gentle smile and made a low, respectful bow to his student. In that moment, both teacher and student had found something more valuable than any answer. They had discovered the absurdity of spiritual comparison itself. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, comparison is the thief of joy. This ancient wisdom illuminates how the mind's habit of measuring spiritual progress against others creates suffering rather than awakening. When we examine our own spiritual journey, how much energy do we waste comparing our inner development to others? This pattern reveals itself in countless ways throughout our practice and daily life. We measure our meditation sessions against what we imagine others achieve. We compare our emotional reactions to the seemingly peaceful demeanor of fellow practitioners. We evaluate our understanding of teachings against the articulate expressions of others. This tendency towards spiritual comparison often stems from what Zen calls merit-seeking mind. The ego's attempt to quantify and rank experiences that are fundamentally beyond measurement. The awakened heart cannot be captured by numbers, ages, or achievements. It exists in a realm where 31 and 81 are equally distant from true understanding. We can observe this pattern in our modern spiritual communities. Social media feeds filled with inspiring quotes and serene selfies from meditation retreats. The subtle competition over who has studied with which teachers, attended which workshops, or achieved which insights. The unconscious ranking of practices, traditions, and levels of supposed advancement. Zen Master Bankei taught, if you think you're enlightened, you're probably not. If you think you're not enlightened, you're probably not. The real question is, what are you doing right now? This wisdom points us beyond the entire framework of spiritual comparison towards simple, direct presence. The monk's bold response, "Shame on you," and the master's humble bow reveal the ultimate teaching. When we step outside the competitive mind, we discover that every moment of genuine practice is complete in itself. The seeking mind that compares and measures dissolves into the immediate reality of this breath, this heartbeat, this awareness that needs no validation. Additionally, our minds tend to create elaborate stories about where we should be based on external markers. If we've been meditating for 5 years, we should be calmer. If we've read dozens of spiritual books, we should be wiser. If we're older, we should be more realized. These shoulds create a constant sense of spiritual inadequacy that becomes another form of suffering. The deeper teaching here shows us that authentic practice exists outside the timeline of comparison. A moment of genuine presence at 31 contains the same infinite potential as a moment of genuine presence at 81. Age, experience, and accumulated knowledge are simply the stage upon which awareness plays. They are not the awareness itself. Tonight, as you notice your mind comparing your spiritual progress to others, can you catch these thoughts with the same gentle humor demonstrated by both the monk and master in this story? Can you bow to the absurdity of spiritual competition and return to the simple practice of being present to what is actually here now? As the Buddha taught, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for generations. Believe only after direct observation and analysis, when it leads to the good and benefit of one and all. The only authentic measure of spiritual development is whether our understanding leads to greater compassion, wisdom, and peace, qualities that cannot be compared or ranked. As we continue on our journey, we encounter a teaching about the playful nature of wisdom and how authentic spiritual confidence reveals itself through humor rather than solemnity. This is one ghost scaring another. On a moonlit evening when shadows dance between the pine trees near Master Sengai's temple, a mischievous samurai was making his way home through the grove. As he walked along the familiar path, he noticed a figure seated in perfect stillness on a large rock beneath one of the ancient pines. Even in the dim light, the silhouette was unmistakable. Master Sengai sat in deep meditation, his posture so motionless and composed that he looked exactly like the legendary Bodhidharma, the founder of Zen Buddhism. The samurai paused, studying the scene with growing curiosity. The next evening, passing through the same grove at twilight, he discovered the master in the identical position, seated on the same rock in profound contemplation. This routine continued for several nights, and the samurai's interest transformed into a mischievous challenge. People say that despite being such a small man, Master Sengai has tremendous courage. The samurai mused to himself with a grin. Well, this looks like the perfect opportunity to test that reputation. The following day, the samurai arrived at the grove early and concealed himself in the branches of a pine tree directly above the rock where Sengai conducted his evening meditation. As darkness fell and the master settled into his usual seated position, the hidden samurai waited for the perfect moment to spring his surprise. Once Sengai appeared deeply absorbed in meditation, the samurai reached down from his perch and grabbed the master's head with both hands. He expected immediate alarm, perhaps a startled cry or frantic struggle. Instead, Master Sengai continued meditating with the same unperturbed stillness, as motionless as a stone Buddha, showing no reaction whatsoever to this unexpected intrusion. Surprised by this lack of response, the samurai tried escalating his prank. "I'm going to get you," he bellowed in his most threatening voice, expecting this dramatic announcement to shatter the master's composure. But this tactic proved equally ineffective. Sengai remained in perfect equanimity, neither flinching nor acknowledging the disturbance, maintaining his meditative posture with unchanged tranquility. Finally feeling ashamed of his childish behavior and impressed by the master's unshakable peace, the samurai quietly climbed down from the tree and slipped away into the night, his prank having backfired completely. The following morning, curious about the master's experience and perhaps wanting to confess his misbehavior, the samurai went to visit Sengai at the temple. The instant he stepped through the entrance, before he could speak a single word, the master shouted from behind a half-open paper screen, "Aha! The ghost!" The samurai jumped backward in shock, instinctively reaching for his sword. "What?" he exclaimed, his warrior reflexes activated by the unexpected confrontation. Master Sengai nearly collapsed with laughter at the samurai's startled reaction. "It's bad business," the master remarked through his mirth, "when one ghost is scaring another." The Buddha once said, "A disciplined mind brings happiness." The deeper teaching here shows us how true equanimity expresses itself, not through rigid seriousness, but through the kind of inner freedom that allows for spontaneous humor and playful wisdom. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between authentic spiritual confidence and the heavy, solemn persona many people adopt when they think they're being spiritual. Master Sengai's complete calmness during the samurai's prank wasn't the result of suppressing his natural responses. It emerged from such deep inner stillness that external disturbances simply couldn't penetrate his awareness. But notice what happened the next day. The master didn't maintain a consistently serious demeanor or pretend the incident never occurred. Instead, he responded with perfect timing and delightful humor, turning the tables on his would-be prankster in a way that revealed the playful nature of true wisdom. Why do we so often assume that spiritual development requires us to become humorless or overly serious? This misconception stems from confusing genuine equanimity with emotional suppression. Real inner peace doesn't eliminate our capacity for joy, surprise, or playfulness. It provides a stable foundation from which these qualities can express themselves more authentically. The samurai's attempt to frighten the master backfired because it was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what creates fear. He assumed that surprise attacks and threatening declarations would disturb someone's peace. But Master Sengai's tranquility wasn't dependent on external circumstances remaining predictable or comfortable. This teaching reveals something important about the nature of spiritual tests and challenges. We often imagine that our practice should make us invulnerable to surprise or difficulty, but true practice makes us responsive rather than reactive. The master wasn't unmoved by the samurai's prank. He was unmoved by the fear and reactivity that the samurai expected it to provoke. We can observe similar dynamics in our own responses to unexpected challenges. When someone tries to provoke us, do we react with the emotional charge they're seeking? Or can we maintain our inner equilibrium while choosing how to respond? The difference between these approaches determines whether we remain centered in our own wisdom or get pulled into someone else's drama. Zen practice cultivates what might be called responsive freedom, the ability to remain centered while still engaging fully with whatever life presents. This isn't emotional numbness or detachment, but rather a quality of awareness that can appreciate humor, surprise, and even mischief without being destabilized by them. Additionally, our minds tend to create false dichotomies between being serious about spiritual practice and maintaining a sense of playfulness about life. Master Sengai's story demonstrates that the deepest wisdom often expresses itself through lightness rather than gravity, through humor rather than solemnity. The master's final comment, "It's bad business when one ghost is scaring another," reveals another layer of teaching. He recognized that both he and the samurai were playing roles, adopting personas that weren't their essential nature. The samurai was playing the ghost of a threatening prankster, while he had momentarily become the ghost of a startled victim. True wisdom sees through these costume dramas to the shared humanity beneath. This story also points us toward understanding the power of timing in all our interactions. The master's perfectly timed "aha," the ghost, wasn't planned or calculated. It emerged spontaneously from his integrated awareness of the entire situation. When we're truly present, we often find that the most appropriate responses arise naturally without forcing or strategizing. Tonight, as you consider your own relationship with surprise, challenge, and playfulness, can you notice areas where you might be taking yourself too seriously? What would it mean to maintain your inner equanimity while still allowing space for humor and spontaneous joy? As the Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. In cultivating both deep peace and playful wisdom, we discover that spiritual development enhances rather than diminishes our capacity for genuine human connection and joy. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about transforming our relationship with suffering. This is the tale of the salt and the lake. In a quiet monastery nestled among rolling hills, there lived an aging master, renowned for his patience and wisdom. Among his students was a young apprentice whose heart had become heavy with complaints about life's difficulties. Each morning, the apprentice would arrive with fresh grievances. "Master, why is life so hard? Yesterday, my meditation was disturbed by noise. Today, my back aches from the hard floor. When will this suffering end?" His voice carried the weight of someone who had catalogued every small discomfort until they had grown into an overwhelming burden. The master listened with infinite patience, but as days turned to weeks, he recognized that words alone would not shift his student's perspective. One crisp morning, as golden sunlight streamed through their simple dwelling, the master made an unusual request. "My dear student," he said gently, "I need you to go to the kitchen and bring me some salt. Just a handful will suffice." The apprentice, puzzled by this simple task, nonetheless obeyed. He returned with cupped palms containing coarse white crystals. "Now," the master instructed, producing a small glass of water, "place all of that salt into this glass and drink it." The young man hesitated. "Master, that seems like far too much salt for such a small amount of water." "Trust the process," the master replied. "Drink." The apprentice poured the salt into the glass, watching the crystals dissolve into a cloudy, unappetizing mixture. He lifted it to his lips and took a large gulp, immediately grimacing as the intensely bitter taste filled his mouth. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Bitter," the apprentice spat. "Terribly, overwhelmingly bitter. I can barely stand it." The master chuckled softly. "Excellent. Now bring that same amount of salt and come with me." Together, they walked in contemplative silence until they reached the shores of a pristine mountain lake. The water stretched before them like a mirror, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it was difficult to tell where earth ended and heaven began. "Now," the master said, "place this handful of salt into the lake." The apprentice waded into the shallow water and opened his hands, watching as the salt crystals scattered across the lake's surface, quickly dissolving without leaving any visible trace. "Drink from the lake," the master instructed. The young man cupped the lake water in his hands and brought it to his lips. The water was clean, refreshing, with the pure taste of mountain streams. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Much fresher," the apprentice replied, genuinely surprised. "Clean and pure." "Do you taste the salt?" the master inquired gently. The student paused, paying careful attention. "No," he said slowly. "I don't taste any salt at all." The master sat beside his student on a smooth stone at the water's edge. His weathered hands reached out to clasp the young man's hands in profound tenderness. "My dear student," the master said, "the pain of life is pure salt, no more, no less. The amount of pain in existence remains constant, but the amount of bitterness we experience depends entirely on the container we put that pain into." The apprentice listened with new understanding. "When you are in pain," the master continued, "the only thing you can truly control is your response. You can choose to be a small glass where every grain of salt overwhelms your senses, or you can choose to enlarge your sense of things to become like this vast lake where the same salt dissolves harmlessly into something much greater." The master paused. "Stop being a glass, my friend. Become a lake. The Buddha once said, 'Pain is certain, suffering is optional.' This fundamental teaching reveals the heart of our relationship with difficulty. We cannot eliminate the challenges woven into human existence, but we have tremendous power over how that pain affects us." What emerges from this story is understanding about consciousness itself. Our awareness is not fixed in size. It can contract into the narrow confines of a glass, where every difficulty looms enormous, or it can expand into the spaciousness of a lake, where the same difficulties become manageable. Why do we often choose to be the glass rather than the lake? First is our tendency toward pain myopia, becoming so focused on discomfort that it fills our entire awareness. Second is our habit of story proliferation, taking a single, painful event and creating elaborate narratives about how unfair life is. Third is the comparing mind, measuring our pain against an imaginary standard of how life should be. The lake perspective doesn't minimize genuine pain or suggest passivity. Rather, it offers a skillful way of relating to inevitable challenges that doesn't compound them with unnecessary suffering. From lake consciousness, we can respond to problems more creatively because we're not overwhelmed. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." From the lake perspective, we remember that everything arises and passes away within the vast space of awareness. Today's crisis becomes tomorrow's memory. We become a lake through practices that naturally expand awareness. Meditation teaches us to rest in spacious presence. Gratitude helps us notice experiences beyond immediate difficulties. Service reminds us that our pain is part of shared human experience. Tonight, as you reflect on current challenges, can you sense the difference between experiencing them from glass consciousness versus lake consciousness? What would it feel like to allow your awareness to expand beyond the immediate intensity of difficulties to include the vast context of this moment? As the Buddha taught, if you want to know your mind, sit down and observe it. If your mind is clear, happiness will come. The clarity he speaks of is not the absence of salt, but the spaciousness to hold it skillfully. In becoming lakes rather than glasses, we discover that pain can become a gateway to deeper compassion and freedom. Our next story reveals the difference between technical mastery and true mastery of oneself. This is the lesson of the archer and the bridge. A young man had devoted years to perfecting his skill with the bow and arrow. Day after day, he practiced in all weather conditions, his dedication absolute, his focus unwavering. His technique became flawless, his aim so precise that he rarely missed his target, even at great distances. Word of his remarkable ability spread throughout the region, and he began winning archery contests one after another, each victory feeding his growing pride and confidence. Flush with success, and perhaps a bit intoxicated by his own reputation, the young archer decided to seek out the ultimate challenge. He had heard whispered stories of an old Zen master who lived high in the mountains, a man renowned not only for his spiritual wisdom, but also for his legendary skill with the bow. I will challenge this old master, the young man thought, and when I defeat him, everyone will know that I am the greatest archer in all the land. He found the master's simple dwelling and issued his challenge with the confidence of youth. "Old man," he said, perhaps more boldly than was respectful, "I have heard of your reputation with the bow. I challenge you to demonstrate whether your skill can match mine." The master, ancient eyes twinkling with quiet amusement, simply nodded his acceptance. The young archer immediately set up his demonstration. He selected a target at a considerable distance, drew his bow with practiced precision, and let loose his arrow. It flew straight and true, striking the exact center of the bullseye with a satisfying thud. Without pausing, he notched a second arrow, drew, aimed, and fired again. This arrow split the first arrow down its center, a feat of such technical brilliance that few archers in the world could have accomplished it. The young man turned to the master with obvious satisfaction, his chest puffed with pride. "There," he said, gesturing toward his perfect demonstration. "Let's see if you can match that display of skill." The old master looked at the target, then at the young man, and smiled gently. But instead of drawing his own bow, he simply motioned for the archer to follow him. "Come," he said quietly, "let us find a more suitable place for this demonstration." Curious about what the old man had in mind, and confident that no location could diminish his superior abilities, the young archer followed the master up a winding mountain path. They climbed higher and higher, the air growing thinner, the path more treacherous, until finally they reached a place where the mountain was split by a deep chasm. Spanning this terrifying gap was a single fallen log, weathered and narrow, that served as a bridge between the two sides. Far below, so far that the bottom disappeared into shadow, the chasm yawned like a hungry mouth. The slightest misstep would mean certain death. Without a word, the old master calmly stepped out onto this precarious bridge. His movements were unhurried, graceful, completely at ease despite the mortal danger. When he reached the center of the log, where it sagged slightly and swayed with his weight, he paused and turned to face a distant tree on the far side of the chasm. Drawing his bow with the same casual precision he might use in his own garden, the master took aim and released his arrow. It flew across the void and struck the distant tree with a clean, direct hit. Not necessarily more accurate than the young man's shots, but accomplished under conditions that would challenge even the most seasoned warrior. The master then gracefully stepped back onto solid ground and gestured toward the log bridge. "Now it is your turn," he said simply. The young archer approached the edge of the chasm and looked down into the seemingly bottomless abyss. His mouth went dry, his palms began to sweat, and his legs trembled beneath him. The very thought of stepping onto that narrow, unstable bridge filled him with paralyzing terror. The technical skill that had made him so confident suddenly seemed irrelevant in the face of this primal fear. He tried to force himself forward, but his body refused to obey. His hands shook so violently that he couldn't even grip his bow properly, much less aim with any precision. The steady breathing and focused concentration that had served him so well in controlled conditions completely abandoned him. The master watched this struggle with compassionate understanding. "You have developed great skill with your bow," he observed gently, "but you have little skill with the mind that lets loose the shot." As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between mastery of technique and mastery of the mind that employs the technique. Why do we so often mistake technical proficiency for true mastery? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to focus on external accomplishments while neglecting the inner development that makes those accomplishments meaningful. We perfect our skills in controlled environments, but discover our limitations when facing uncertainty, danger, or genuine challenge. The young archer had indeed achieved remarkable technical skill, but only under ideal conditions. When his environment changed, when fear entered the equation, when the stakes became real, when his sense of safety was threatened, his carefully cultivated abilities disappeared entirely. His mastery was revealed to be shallow, dependent on external circumstances rather than inner stability. Consider your own areas of expertise. How does your competence hold up under pressure? When faced with genuine stakes, unfamiliar circumstances, or emotional challenges, do your skills remain intact, or do they crumble like the young archer's confidence on the bridge? In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called unshakable presence, the ability to remain centered and effective regardless of external conditions. This doesn't mean eliminating fear or challenge, but developing the inner stability that allows us to function skillfully even when afraid, uncertain, or under pressure. The master's demonstration wasn't about showing superior archery skills. It was about revealing the profound difference between skill that depends on perfect conditions and skill that emerges from inner mastery. His arrow didn't need to be more accurate than the young man's. It simply needed to be released from a place of genuine equanimity. Zen Master Bankei taught, "The unborn Buddha mind can handle any situation." This points to a quality of awareness that remains constant, whether we're shooting at safe targets or standing on precipices. It's the difference between confidence that comes from controlling our environment and confidence that comes from trusting our ability to respond wisely to whatever arises. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." One arrow shot from genuine presence and inner stability has more value than 1,000 arrows shot from ego and carefully controlled conditions. True mastery reveals itself not in perfect circumstances, but in our ability to maintain our center when everything around us is uncertain. Look deeply at your own relationship to challenge and fear. Where in your life do you perform well in safe, controlled environments but struggle when stakes are raised or conditions become unpredictable? This isn't a failure. It's simply information about where your practice needs to deepen. Tonight, as you consider the various skills and competencies you've developed, can you distinguish between those that depend on perfect conditions and those that remain stable under pressure? Can you sense the difference between the confidence that comes from avoiding challenge and the confidence that comes from meeting challenge with presence? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, chaos is inherent in all compounded things. Strive on with diligence. Life is the bridge over the chasm, uncertain, sometimes frightening, always requiring us to find our balance, not in the safety of solid ground, but in our ability to remain centered while walking through space. True mastery isn't about perfect aim. It's about maintaining our equilibrium, no matter where we find ourselves standing. Our next story is about the natural emergence of ethics when consciousness becomes fully awake. This unfolds in a temple courtyard where a warrior seeks understanding about the nature of enlightenment. A renowned samurai approaches a Zen master with the directness characteristic of his training. His armor catches the afternoon sunlight as he bows respectfully before speaking. "Master," he says, "I have heard of your wisdom and come seeking guidance. The way of meditation, the endless sitting, the quiet contemplation, these practices do not suit my nature. I am a man of action, accustomed to decisive movement and clear objectives. Is there a path to enlightenment that aligns with my temperament?" The Zen master considers this request thoughtfully. After a long pause, he asks, "Is there something you truly love doing? An activity that captures your complete attention?" The samurai's eyes light up immediately. "Yes, chess. I am passionate about the game. When I play, nothing else exists. The board becomes my entire world, and every piece movement requires total concentration." The master nods approvingly and calls for a chessboard to be brought to the courtyard. As servants arrange the pieces, the master looks around and notices an elderly groundskeeper tending nearby flowers. "You," he calls to the old man, "come here. You will play chess with our warrior friend." The groundskeeper approaches hesitantly, his weathered hands still dirty from gardening. The samurai looks puzzled. Surely this simple laborer cannot provide worthy competition. But before either player can object, the Zen master draws the samurai's own sword from its sheath. "You will play," the master announces with quiet authority. "But the stakes are absolute. Whoever loses this game will lose his head to this blade." The atmosphere transforms instantly. What began as a casual request for spiritual guidance has become a matter of life and death. The samurai stares at the board, suddenly understanding that his renowned chess skills, his very survival, depend on the moves he makes in the next hour. The game begins, and immediately the samurai enters a state of concentration deeper than any he has experienced. Every fiber of his being focuses on the board. Each potential move is analyzed with crystalline clarity. The familiar pieces seem to glow with significance as he calculates his sequences 10 moves ahead. As the game progresses, the samurai realizes with growing amazement that the old groundskeeper plays with unexpected skill. This is no mere laborer, but a formidable opponent who matches his every strategy. The stakes make every decision feel like the difference between existence and annihilation. Gradually, through superior technique and intense focus, the samurai begins to gain advantage. He can see the sequence of moves that will lead inevitably to victory. The groundskeeper's position becomes increasingly hopeless. In just a few more moves, the samurai will achieve checkmate, and this kind old man will die. At the moment when victory lies within reach, the samurai looks up from the board and gazes directly into the groundskeeper's eyes. He sees no fear there, only gentle acceptance and a quality of kindness that has persisted even under the shadow of death. In that instant, something shifts in the warrior's consciousness. Despite his survival instinct, despite his training, Despite having earned his victory through superior skill, the samurai finds himself unable to make the winning move. His hand hovers over the pieces, but cannot complete the sequence that would cost this innocent man his life. The Zen master, who has watched this internal struggle unfold, suddenly lifts the sword and brings it down decisively, splitting the chessboard cleanly in half, scattering pieces across the courtyard's stones. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. This ancient wisdom illuminates the spontaneous emergence of compassion when awareness becomes complete. Why did the samurai hesitate at the moment of victory? Zen Buddhism reveals that when consciousness becomes truly present, undiluted by mental commentary or emotional reactivity, our fundamental interconnectedness becomes apparent. The artificial boundaries between self and other begin to dissolve, making genuine harm to others feel like self-injury. The samurai experienced what Buddhist psychology calls awakened awareness, a state of such complete presence that the illusion of separation temporarily disappeared. In ordinary consciousness, he could easily defeat an opponent and feel satisfied with victory, but under the pressure of absolute attention, he discovered something deeper than competitive instinct, an innate recognition of shared vulnerability and common humanity. This story addresses a common question about Zen practice. Where are the moral guidelines? How do we ensure ethical behavior without detailed commandments and regulations? The answer lies in this tale's demonstration that genuine ethics arise naturally from awakened consciousness rather than imposed rules. When we are truly present, not lost in mental narratives about ourselves, not defending ego positions, not pursuing personal agendas at others' expense, we spontaneously act in harmony with life rather than opposition to it. Compassion isn't something we add to awareness. It's what awareness looks like when it's clear enough to recognize reality. The Buddha said, "If you want to know your past actions, look at your present circumstances. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." The samurai's willingness to sacrifice his survival for a stranger's life revealed what his intense practice of presence had cultivated, a capacity to respond from wisdom rather than conditioning. Consider moments in your own life when complete absorption in an activity led to unexpected insights or spontaneous kindness. Perhaps while deeply engaged in creative work, you lost track of petty concerns. Maybe during intense physical challenge, your usual mental chatter quieted and clearer perception emerged. The chess game represents any activity that demands total presence. When we bring this quality of attention to our relationships, work, and daily interactions, we often discover that the right action becomes obvious without consulting external authorities or moral frameworks. Master Bankei taught his students about acting from the unborn Buddha mind that naturally expresses itself in beneficial ways when not obscured by self-centered thinking. This isn't about forcing ourselves to be good, but about removing the barriers to our innate wisdom and compassion. The Zen master's decision to split the board, rather than let either person die, points to transcendent solutions that become visible when we move beyond dualistic thinking. Life rarely presents us with pure either-or choices. More often, presence-based awareness reveals creative alternatives that honor everyone's welfare. Tonight, as you encounter moments requiring ethical choices, can you pause long enough to access the clarity that emerges when you're truly present? Perhaps you'll discover that the guidance you seek already exists within the stillness that lies beneath your mental agitation. As the Buddha taught, when you realize how perfect everything is, you will tilt your head back and laugh at the sky. This includes the perfect wisdom that emerges when consciousness becomes clear enough to see beyond the illusion of separation. Let us continue on our journey with a story about the intensity required for genuine spiritual awakening. This is the tale of the drowning lesson. Beside a crystal-clear mountain river, where water flowed over smooth stones with the endless song of moving current, a hermit had established his practice. For years, he had lived in solitude, finding in the rhythm of flowing water and changing seasons a perfect mirror for the movements of his own consciousness. One morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the canopy and the air carried the fresh scent of mountain laurel, a young man approached the hermit's simple dwelling. The seeker had traveled far, his clothing dusty from the journey, his face earnest with spiritual longing. "Master," the young man said, bowing respectfully, "I wish to become your disciple." The hermit looked up from his contemplation, studying the newcomer with eyes that had grown accustomed to reading the subtle signs of genuine versus superficial spiritual interest. "Why?" the hermit replied simply. The young man paused, considering his answer carefully. "Because I want to find God," he said finally, believing this to be the most noble response. What happened next took the seeker completely by surprise. Without warning, the hermit sprang to his feet, grabbed the young man by the scruff of his neck, and dragged him toward the river. Before the stunned visitor could protest, he found himself being pushed into the clear, cold water. The hermit's strong hands forced the young man's head beneath the surface and held him there. Panic set in immediately. The seeker's lungs began to burn as his oxygen depleted. He kicked and struggled with increasing desperation, his arms flailing as he fought to break free. Every second felt like an eternity as his body screamed for air. Nothing existed except the urgent, overwhelming need to breathe. After what seemed like a lifetime but was probably only a minute, the hermit finally pulled the gasping young man up out of the water. The seeker coughed violently, water streaming from his nose and mouth as he struggled to fill his lungs with precious air. His entire body shook from cold, shock, and the aftermath of near drowning. When his breathing finally normalized, the hermit spoke again, his voice carrying a different quality, still gentle, but charged with unmistakable intensity. "Tell me," he said, watching the young man's face carefully, "what did you want most of all when you were underwater?" The answer came without hesitation, raw and honest. "Air." The hermit nodded slowly, satisfied that his lesson had found its mark. "Very well," he said. "Go home and come back to me when you want God as much as you just wanted air." Without another word, the hermit turned and walked back to his place of meditation, leaving the dripping, shaken young man to contemplate the profound teaching he had just received. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Yet this wisdom must be ignited by genuine spiritual fire, not merely intellectual interest. The hermit's dramatic teaching illuminates the difference between casual spiritual curiosity and the total commitment that authentic awakening requires. What emerges from this story is recognition that spiritual seeking demands the same intensity and urgency we naturally bring to physical survival. The young seeker thought he wanted God, but his desire was still within the realm of preference rather than necessity. He wanted spiritual awakening, as an addition to life rather than as life itself. Why do we approach spiritual development with tentative commitment? First is our attachment to comfort and the familiar. Genuine transformation requires letting go of who we think we are, which the ego experiences as death. Second is our misunderstanding of what spiritual seeking entails. Popular culture presents awakening as a pleasant expansion, but traditional teachings describe it as a dismantling of illusion. Third is our tendency to compartmentalize spirituality as one area among others, rather than a complete reorientation of our relationship to existence. Consider how this plays out in contemporary seeking. We collect techniques like trophies, jumping from meditation retreats to healing workshops to consciousness conferences, accumulating experiences without allowing any single practice to fundamentally transform us. We want the insurance policy of spiritual development without paying the premium of total dedication. The drowning experience represents what mystics call the dark night of the soul, moments when our usual sources of identity and security are stripped away. In such moments, we discover what we truly value most deeply. This is the quality of desire that spiritual awakening requires. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck wrote, "Practice is not about achieving some special state. Practice is about being willing to die to who you think you are." The hermit's lesson brought the young seeker face to face with this death-like quality of authentic spiritual work. This intensity doesn't mean spiritual practice should be grim. Rather, it means bringing the same passionate engagement to inner development that we naturally bring to whatever we value most deeply. A musician practicing for Carnegie Hall, a scientist pursuing a breakthrough, all demonstrate the focused dedication that spiritual awakening requires. The river represents the flow of ordinary consciousness, where we spend most of our time skimming along the surface. Being pushed underwater symbolizes the necessity of going deeper into the unconscious patterns that actually govern our lives. This depth work requires the same survival level intensity the seeker experienced when deprived of air. Tonight, as you consider your own spiritual aspirations, can you honestly assess the quality of your desire? Is your seeking driven by curiosity and preference, or by necessity? What would it mean to want truth as much as you want your next breath? As the Buddha taught, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. The path to awakening lies not in accumulating more spiritual experiences, but in bringing the totality of our being to whatever practice we choose. Let us now turn to a tale of a young monk who believed he had failed in his spiritual journey. This is the story of the Golden Wake. At a peaceful monastery overlooking a serene mountain lake, a young student sat dejected on the temple steps as the sun began its descent toward the water. His shoulders sagged with the weight of disappointment, and his eyes reflected the heaviness in his heart. For months, he had struggled with his studies, unable to grasp the profound teachings that seemed to come so naturally to his fellow monks. "The boat is coming to take me home because I have failed in my studies here at the monastery," he said to his teacher, who had quietly approached and sat beside him. "What can I say to my family? They sent me here with such hope, believing I would return as a learned monk who could guide others on the path." The old teacher gazed out at the lake, where a small wooden boat was making its way slowly across the still water. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. "Say that you did your best, and that is as much as anyone can do," he answered gently, his voice carrying the wisdom of many years. "But I wanted to be a famous monk and teach others," the boy replied, his voice thick with disappointment. I dreamed of leading meditation sessions, of having students seek my guidance, of making a real difference in the world. You can, the teacher said simply. How? Asked the sad boy, looking at his teacher with confusion. I couldn't even memorize the basic sutras. I fell asleep during meditation. I failed at everything that matters. The teacher smiled and pointed toward the water. Live from your heart. I will show you. Do you see that boat making its way across the lake with the sun setting behind it? Yes, the boy replied, following his teacher's gaze. Do you see its wake spreading across the lake? See how the boat looks like the apex of a golden triangle as the wake fans out from its bow? The boy squinted, trying to see what his teacher described. Sort of. Squint, said the teacher patiently. That boat is you as you leave the monastery. The lake is your life. The wake is the effect that you will have on the world. Each ripple triggers another ripple, which triggers another. By constantly striving to live as wise and loving a life as you can teach the path of love to everyone you meet simply by being yourself. A few of these people will pass on your good example to others. Thus, the expanding golden wake of good works begets other good works. Most important, notice how each ripple catches the sun and bounces its light back to heaven. The boy watched in wonder as the simple boat continued its journey, the wake indeed forming an ever-widening triangle of light upon the water. Each small wave caught the golden sunlight and reflected it back toward the sky in countless sparkling points. Would you come home with me and explain all of this to my father? Asked the boy, hope beginning to kindle in his voice. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. The deeper teaching here shows us that influence spreads not through grand gestures or perfect knowledge, but through the simple authenticity of a heart committed to goodness. Why do we believe that only formal credentials or recognized achievements qualify us to make a meaningful impact? Zen Buddhism points to our attachment to external validation and our misunderstanding of how wisdom actually transmits from person to person. We imagine that teaching requires a podium, a title, or a certificate, when in reality, the most profound lessons are shared through the quality of our presence and the integrity of our actions. Consider how often throughout your day you encounter people who touch your life not through their expertise, but through their kindness, their patience, or their simple human warmth. The grocery store clerk who greets you with genuine care, the stranger who offers directions with a smile, the friend who listens without judgment. These people create ripples that extend far beyond their awareness. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called unconscious teaching. This is the natural transmission that occurs when we align our actions with our deepest values. Like the boat on the lake, we may not see our wake, but it spreads inevitably behind us, touching shores we never knew existed. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." Happiness never decreases by being shared. Each moment of authentic living becomes a teaching. Each act of compassion creates ripples. Each choice to respond with wisdom rather than reactivity sends light back toward heaven. Tonight, as you reflect on your own journey, can you see the golden wake you're already creating? Perhaps it's in the patience you show a difficult family member, the encouragement you offer a struggling colleague, or the simple presence you bring to everyday encounters. The light you reflect may be illuminating paths you've never imagined. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a master whose outrageous compassion challenged every convention. This is the story of something from nothing. One day, while traveling through the countryside, Zen Master Zenko discovered the ruins of what had once been a beautiful temple. The roof had collapsed, weeds grew through the floor stones, and debris filled the meditation hall. Yet something in the structure's bones called to him, a quality of sacred space that persisted despite the decay. Zenko felt moved to restore this abandoned place of practice, but he faced an obvious problem. He possessed absolutely nothing. No money, no materials, no wealthy patrons, no organizational support. What he did have was an understanding of human nature and a willingness to risk everything for his vision. After contemplating his situation, Zenko wrote a large sign announcing, "This month, on the 15th day, the pilgrim Zen Master Zenko will perform a ritual self-cremation. Those who wish to donate money for firewood are invited to witness this sacred ceremony." He posted these signs throughout the region, and soon word spread like wildfire. A monk planning to burn himself alive was unprecedented, shocking, fascinating. Some were horrified, others curious, many skeptical. But the announcements had their intended effect. Donations began pouring in from people who wanted to witness this extraordinary event, whether out of reverence, morbid curiosity, or the desire to support what they saw as an act of ultimate spiritual commitment. On the appointed day, crowds gathered at the ruined temple. They brought not only money for firewood, but also food, banners, and various offerings. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and solemnity. A great pile of wood had been assembled in the temple courtyard, and Zenko sat calmly in its center, dressed in white robes, his eyes closed in deep meditation. The crowd waited in hushed silence as the sun moved across the sky. Hours passed. Zenko remained motionless, seemingly preparing his spirit for its final journey. The tension was almost unbearable as people watched this man they believed was about to die for his spiritual convictions. Suddenly, Zenko looked up at the sky and nodded as if receiving a message invisible to others. He addressed the crowd with a voice full of wonder and authority. "Listen carefully, everyone. I hear voices speaking from the clouds. Just as I was prepared to enter into final extinction, all the enlightened beings have spoken to me saying, 'It is too early for you to leave this defiled world. Remain here a while longer and dedicate yourself to saving all living beings. Therefore, I cannot proceed with the cremation today.'" The crowd stood in stunned silence, unsure whether to feel relieved, disappointed, or deceived. But Zenko's presence carried such conviction that most accepted his explanation. With the substantial donations that had been gathered for firewood, he was able to completely restore the abandoned temple, creating a beautiful sanctuary where monks and lay people could practice for generations to come. As the Buddha observed, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth that sometimes our greatest service emerges through methods that conventional thinking cannot understand or approve. Why do we struggle with unconventional approaches to compassionate action? Zen Buddhism reveals how our attachment to proper procedures and social approval can actually limit our ability to respond creatively to genuine need. We become so concerned with doing things the right way that we lose sight of what the situation actually requires. Zenko's outrageous strategy challenges our assumptions about spiritual behavior. Was he lying? Was he manipulating people? Or was he demonstrating a deeper understanding of how compassion sometimes works? From one perspective, his actions seem deceptive. From another, he found the only way to inspire people to support something they secretly wanted to support, but needed a compelling reason to justify. This story points us toward understanding what Zen calls skillful means, the willingness to use whatever methods serve the greater good, even when those methods challenge conventional morality. Zenko's threat of self-immolation was never really about destroying himself. It was about creating something beautiful from nothing through understanding human psychology and spiritual motivation. Consider how often we limit our capacity to help others because we're attached to being seen as proper, honest, or conventional. How many opportunities to serve do we miss because the most effective approach might require us to stretch beyond our comfort zones or challenge others' expectations? Zenko's willingness to risk his reputation and potentially his life if the plan had failed demonstrates the fierce commitment that authentic compassion sometimes requires. The voices from the clouds represent the wisdom that emerges when we're truly committed to serving something larger than our personal concerns. Whether we interpret them as literal divine intervention or as Zenko's own deepest wisdom speaking through him, they point to the same truth: that sometimes the greatest sacrifice we can make is to continue living and working for others' benefit, rather than seeking our own spiritual escape. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck taught, "Compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others." Zenko's strange compassion emerged from understanding both his own willingness to die for his vision and others' deep hunger to participate in something meaningful. The restored temple stands as testament to the power of creative compassion. Every stone placed, every beam raised, every meditation session held in that space was made possible by one man's willingness to think beyond conventional approaches to seemingly impossible problems. The temple became real, not despite Zenko's unconventional methods, but because of them. Tonight, as you consider the needs you see around you, in your family, community, or world, can you feel Zenko's spirit encouraging you to think creatively about service? What assumptions about proper helping might you need to question? What seemingly impossible good works might become possible if you were willing to risk conventional approval in service of genuine benefit? As the Buddha taught, if you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path. Sometimes the most profound service requires us to illuminate possibilities that others cannot yet see, trusting that our commitment to the greater good will reveal the means to accomplish what seems impossible. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a teaching about the immediate nature of spiritual states and how they manifest through our present moment awareness. This is heaven and hell. A monk had traveled from the distant province of Busan, journeying many days through mountain paths and across rivers to reach Master Sengai's temple. He carried with him questions that had been troubling his mind for months, metaphysical concerns about the nature of existence and the ultimate destinations of human souls. These were not casual inquiries, but deep spiritual problems that had disturbed his meditation and left him unable to find peace in his practice. Upon arriving at the temple, the monk requested a formal audience with the master to discuss matters of the highest spiritual importance. When he was granted this meeting, He approached with the serious demeanor of one who believed he was about to engage in profound theological discourse. "Master," he began with ceremonial gravity, "I have come seeking wisdom about the ultimate realities. What can you tell me about heaven? What is the nature of this blessed realm that awaits the righteous? How should we understand the rewards that come to those who live virtuously?" Without any verbal response, Master Sengai simply lay down on the floor as if preparing for sleep. He closed his eyes peacefully and settled into a position of complete relaxation, embodying a state of perfect contentment and ease. The monk waited respectfully for some time, expecting that this demonstration was perhaps a prelude to verbal teaching, or that the master was gathering his thoughts for a comprehensive explanation. When no words came, he decided to continue with his questioning, hoping to prompt a more conventional response. "And what about hell?" the monk persisted, his voice carrying the same earnest concern. "Please help me understand the nature of suffering in the afterlife. What awaits those who live wrongly? How should we comprehend divine punishment and the consequences of negative karma?" Master Sengai's response was immediate and theatrical. He closed his eyes tightly and began snoring loudly, producing exaggerated sounds that filled the meditation hall with unmistakable noise and disturbance. The monk's patience finally reached its limit. His long journey, his sincere spiritual seeking, his respectful approach, all of this seemed to be met with mockery and disrespect. "I've come all this way to question him seriously about the Dharma," he muttered indignantly, "and he has the rudeness to just fall asleep. What kind of spiritual teacher behaves this way?" Glaring at the master with obvious frustration, and feeling deeply insulted by what he perceived as dismissive treatment, the monk began gathering his belongings and started moving toward the door, ready to leave in disgust. At that precise moment, Master Sengai sat up abruptly with the alertness of someone who had never been sleeping at all. Pointing directly at the departing monk, he remarked with perfect clarity and timing, "That is hell." The Buddha understood that we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing that heaven and hell are not distant destinations, but immediate experiences created by our present moment state of consciousness. This ancient wisdom illuminates our tendency to seek spiritual understanding in abstract concepts and future scenarios, rather than recognizing the sacred realities available in each moment. The monk's earnest questions about metaphysical destinations prevented him from seeing the heaven and hell being demonstrated directly in his immediate experience. When Master Sengai lay down peacefully to demonstrate heaven, he wasn't offering a symbol or metaphor. He was embodying the actual state of consciousness that constitutes heavenly experience. Complete ease, perfect contentment, freedom from agitation or striving. These qualities represent the essence of what we imagine heaven to be, available right now through present moment awareness. Similarly, his loud snoring to represent hell wasn't merely theatrical. The disturbance, agitation, and disruption he created mirrored the mental states that create hellish experiences in our daily lives. Hell isn't a place we go to after death. It's the quality of consciousness we experience when caught in anger, frustration, judgment, and resistance. Why do we consistently look for spiritual truth in complex explanations and future possibilities, rather than recognizing what's immediately available? This pattern reflects our conditioning to believe that profound realities must be complicated, distant, or requiring special qualifications to access. We miss the heaven that's present in simple contentment because we're scanning for something more dramatic or exotic. The monk's angry departure perfectly demonstrated the hell realm that Master Sengai had just been illustrating through his snoring. Caught in frustration, judgment, and indignation, the monk was literally living in hell, not as punishment for wrongdoing, but as the natural consequence of his mental state. His experience was determined not by external circumstances, but by his internal responses to those circumstances. This teaching reveals something crucial about the nature of spiritual realization. Heaven and hell are not rewards and punishments administered by external authorities, but natural expressions of how consciousness experiences itself. When we're at peace, present, and accepting, we inhabit heaven regardless of our external conditions. When we're agitated, resistant, and judgmental, we create hell regardless of our circumstances. We can observe these shifting states throughout each day. The moment of perfect satisfaction with a simple meal, that's heaven. The spiral of anger when someone cuts us off in traffic, that's hell. The contentment of watching sunset colors change across the sky, heaven again. The mental torture of replaying an embarrassing moment, back to hell. Zen practice cultivates the ability to recognize these states as they arise and to understand our role in creating them. Rather than being victims of circumstances that impose heaven or hell upon us, we discover our power to choose which realm we inhabit through our responses to whatever appears. This story also points us toward understanding the immediacy of spiritual transformation. We don't need to wait until after death or until we've achieved some advanced level of realization to experience the essence of what we call heaven. It's available whenever we can settle into simple presence and acceptance of what is. The monk's expectation that spiritual teaching should come through complex explanations and theological discussions prevented him from receiving the direct transmission that Master Sengai offered. True Dharma teaching often bypasses intellectual understanding to point directly toward immediate experience. The most profound truths are often demonstrated rather than explained. Additionally, our minds tend to create elaborate future scenarios, both hoped for and feared, that distract us from engaging fully with present experience. The monk's concern about ultimate destinations in the afterlife made him unavailable to the ultimate realities being revealed in the current moment. We also find ourselves confronted by the question of what constitutes respectful spiritual inquiry. The monk felt insulted by the master's unconventional teaching methods, but his angry response revealed that his respect was conditional on receiving instruction in the format he expected, rather than in the form that would be most effective. Tonight, as you notice your mental states shifting throughout the evening, can you recognize the moments when you're creating heaven through acceptance and presence, and the moments when you're creating hell through resistance and agitation? What would it mean to take conscious responsibility for which realm you inhabit, regardless of external circumstances? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Heaven is not a reward for good behavior, but the natural expression of a peaceful mind, available in any moment when we stop creating hell through our resistance to what is. Now, let us explore a story about recognition and the wisdom hidden in plain sight. This is the lesson of the visitor and the holy man. Word had spread throughout the countryside about a remarkable holy man who possessed extraordinary wisdom and spiritual power. People said he could answer any question, solve any problem, and provide guidance that would transform the most troubled life. He lived, according to these stories, in a simple house high atop a mountain, far from the distractions and corruptions of ordinary village life. A man from the valley below had been struggling with a persistent problem that seemed to have no solution. He had tried everything he could think of, consulting friends, seeking advice from local elders, even visiting other teachers, but nothing had brought him the clarity or peace he desperately sought. When he heard about the holy man on the mountain, he knew he had to make the journey, no matter how difficult it might be. The path up the mountain was steep and treacherous. The man climbed for hours under the burning sun, his feet growing sore, his breathing labored, his water supply dwindling, but his determination never wavered. He was certain that once he reached the top and met this legendary figure, all his troubles would be resolved through the holy man's superior wisdom and spiritual insight. Finally, after a grueling climb that left him exhausted and dusty, he reached the simple house at the mountain's peak. The structure was modest and weathered, exactly what he had expected for someone who had transcended worldly concerns. He approached the door with a mixture of anticipation and reverence, preparing himself to meet someone who possessed wisdom far beyond that of ordinary people. When he knocked, an elderly servant answered. The man was plain and unremarkable, his clothes simple, his manner humble, his appearance entirely ordinary. He looked like any of a dozen servants the visitor might encounter in his own village. "I would like to see the wise holy man," the visitor said, barely glancing at the servant as he spoke. His eyes were already searching past the old man into the house, eager to catch a glimpse of the extraordinary being he had climbed so far to meet. The servant smiled warmly and gestured for him to enter. "Please, come inside," he said gently, leading the way through the modest dwelling. As they walked through the house, the visitor looked around eagerly, his heart racing with anticipation. He examined every room they passed, searching for signs of the holy man's presence, perhaps special robes, sacred objects, or an aura of otherworldly peace. The servant continued to guide him quietly through the simple rooms, past basic furnishings and ordinary household items. Before the visitor quite realized what was happening, they had walked through the entire house and arrived at the back door. The servant opened it and gestured toward the path that led back down the mountain. The visitor stopped abruptly, confusion and disappointment washing over him. "Wait," he said, turning to face the servant with growing frustration. "I didn't come all this way to be escorted through an empty house. I want to see the holy man. Where is he?" The old servant's smile deepened, and his eyes twinkled with gentle amusement. "You already have seen him," he said quietly. "But, more importantly, I have a teaching for you that will solve whatever problem brought you here today." The visitor stared at him, not understanding. This ordinary old man couldn't possibly be the legendary holy figure he had heard about. Where was the radiant presence, the obvious signs of spiritual attainment, the dramatic wisdom that everyone talked about? "Here is the teaching," the servant continued, his voice soft but carrying absolute conviction. "Everyone you meet in life, even if they appear plain and insignificant to you, see each of them as a wise, holy man or woman. If you can do this, if you can truly see the sacred in every person you encounter, then whatever problem you brought here today will be solved." Buddha's wisdom tells us, if you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. This tale unveils the profound truth that we find what we're prepared to see, and our capacity for recognition determines what wisdom becomes available to us. Why do we search for the sacred in special places and extraordinary people while overlooking the wisdom that surrounds us every day? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioning that associates spiritual truth with dramatic appearances, exotic circumstances, and obviously impressive figures. But the deepest teachings often come disguised as the most ordinary encounters. The visitor's problem wasn't really the external difficulty that brought him to the mountain. His deeper problem was his inability to recognize wisdom when it didn't match his preconceptions. He was so focused on finding someone who looked like his idea of a holy man that he almost missed the actual holy man standing right in front of him. Consider your own daily interactions. How often do you dismiss people because they don't seem impressive, educated, or obviously wise? The checkout clerk who greets you with genuine warmth, the janitor who works with quiet dignity, the child who asks innocent but profound questions. Any of these encounters might offer exactly the insight you need if you're prepared to receive it. This teaching transforms how we move through the world. Instead of searching for wisdom in special places or waiting for obviously enlightened teachers to appear, we begin to approach every person as a potential source of insight. The homeless person on the street, the difficult co-worker, even the family member who annoys us. Each becomes a teacher when we're ready to learn. Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. When we truly see others as sacred, we naturally forget our own ego's need to feel superior or special. The visitor's disappointment came from his attachment to being someone who had access to exclusive wisdom, rather than someone who could recognize wisdom everywhere. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." Every person carries this same capacity to kindle understanding in others, but only when we approach them with the recognition that they might have something valuable to offer. Look deeply at your current relationships and daily encounters. Where might you be overlooking wisdom because it comes in an ordinary package? What would change in your interactions if you truly treated every person as someone who might be a disguised holy man or woman? Tonight, as you consider the various people in your life, family members, colleagues, strangers you encounter, can you practice the holy man's teaching? Can you look past surface appearances and social roles to see the deeper wisdom that every conscious being carries? Can you approach tomorrow's interactions with the recognition that your next teacher might be standing right in front of you, waiting to be seen? As the Buddha observed, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The distinction between holy and ordinary, wise and simple, teacher and student exists primarily in our own minds. When we learn to see past these artificial categories, we discover that wisdom is everywhere, waiting patiently for our recognition. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a teaching about the temporary nature of all our possessions and positions. This is the story of the inn that calls itself a palace. In ancient India, a renowned spiritual teacher had spent many years wandering from village to village, sharing the Buddha's teachings with anyone who would listen. His reputation for wisdom and compassion had spread throughout the land, reaching even the ears of kings and nobles. One day, during his travels, he arrived at the capital city of a great kingdom, where a magnificent palace rose above the bustling streets like a jeweled crown. The palace was truly a wonder to behold. Its walls were constructed of the finest marble, inlaid with precious stones that caught and reflected the sunlight in brilliant cascades of color. Gardens filled with exotic flowers and flowing fountains surrounded the structure, and guards in gleaming armor stood at attention throughout the grounds. It was clearly the dwelling of someone who commanded immense wealth and power. The spiritual teacher approached the main entrance with the same calm dignity he brought to every encounter, whether with kings or beggars. The guards, recognizing him by his simple robes and serene presence, made no move to stop him. Word of his arrival had preceded him, and they had been instructed to allow him passage. Walking through corridors lined with silk tapestries and golden statues, the teacher made his way directly to the throne room, where the king sat upon an elaborately carved chair elevated above the marble floor. Courtiers in fine clothes gathered around the throne, their jeweled ornaments glinting in the light from tall windows. The king, a middle-aged man wearing robes of deep purple silk and a crown of gold and diamonds, looked up as the teacher entered. He had been expecting this visit, though he wasn't entirely sure what to expect from their encounter. "What do you want?" the king asked directly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers and unquestioning obedience. The teacher bowed respectfully, but spoke with quiet confidence. "Your Majesty, I would like a place to sleep in this inn." A ripple of surprise moved through the assembled courtiers. The king's eyebrows rose, and his expression shifted from curiosity to confusion. "But this is not an inn," the king replied, gesturing to the opulent surroundings. "This is my palace. I am the ruler of this kingdom, and this has been the seat of royal power for generations." The teacher nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this information carefully. "I see. May I ask, Your Majesty, who owned this palace before you?" "My father," the king replied, his tone becoming slightly defensive. "He ruled here for 30 years before his death. This palace was his seat of power, as it is now mine." "Ah," the teacher said with genuine interest. "And who owned it before him?" "My grandfather," the king answered, beginning to sense where these questions might lead. "He too ruled from this throne. He also is dead." The teacher paused, allowing the weight of these words to settle in the vast throne room. The courtiers had grown quiet, sensing the profound direction of this unusual conversation. Even the king found himself waiting, almost despite himself, for the teacher's response. Finally, the teacher spoke with gentle clarity that seemed to fill every corner of the ornate room. "And this place where people live for a short time and then move on, did I hear you say that it is not an inn?" The silence that followed was complete. The king sat motionless on his throne, the teacher's words penetrating layers of assumption and identity he had never questioned. The courtiers remained frozen, as if witnessing something beyond their normal understanding of royal protocol and worldly power. The Buddha taught, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence." This profound truth reveals itself in the teacher's penetrating question about the inn that calls itself a palace. Why do we cling so fiercely to possessions and positions that are, by their very nature, temporary? Zen Buddhism explains that our attachment to permanence creates suffering because it conflicts with the fundamental reality of impermanence. Everything we think we own, including our own bodies and identities, we hold only temporarily. Look deeply at your own experience. The house you call yours, the car you drive, the job title you carry, the bank account balance you monitor, all of these are temporary arrangements. You inhabit them for a period of time, then move on, just as others inhabited them before you and will inhabit them after you. This doesn't mean we should become indifferent to our responsibilities or careless with our possessions. Rather, it invites us to hold them more lightly, recognizing their transient nature. The king's palace was indeed magnificent and served important functions, but it was also unmistakably an inn where occupants stayed temporarily before departing. The deeper teaching here shows us how identification with temporary roles creates unnecessary suffering when we forget the impermanent nature of our positions, whether as parent, professional, homeowner, or even student of Zen. We create anxiety trying to maintain what cannot be permanently maintained. Consider your own attachments. Perhaps it's your professional identity, your relationships, your health, or your spiritual achievements. Each of these is precious and worthy of care, but each is also subject to change. The executive becomes retired. The parent becomes empty nester. The student becomes teacher. The healthy person faces illness. These transitions are not failures, but natural expressions of impermanence. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." This teaching reframes impermanence from something to fear into something to celebrate. Because nothing lasts forever, suffering states can transform into joy. Closed hearts can open to love, and even the most entrenched patterns can shift toward wisdom. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called non-attachment, caring deeply while holding lightly. This doesn't mean we become cold or indifferent, but that we learn to love without clinging, to work without grasping, and to enjoy without demanding permanence. The spiritual teacher's insight pierces through the illusion that any of us are permanent owners of anything. We are all temporary guests in the inn of existence, borrowing our roles and possessions for the brief time we inhabit them. This recognition can bring either despair or profound liberation, depending on how we receive it. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Everything is impermanent. Try to accomplish as much virtue as possible." This teaching encourages us not to waste our temporary time in the inn, but to use it wisely, cultivating love, wisdom, and compassion while we have the opportunity. Tonight, as you rest in your own temporary dwelling, surrounded by your own temporary possessions, can you feel the profound freedom that comes with recognizing their transient nature? Can you sense how this recognition might actually increase your appreciation rather than diminish it? As the Buddha taught, of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all meditative themes, that on death is supreme. By remembering the temporary nature of our stay in this inn called life, we discover the urgency and preciousness of each moment we're given to practice love and awareness. Our next story reveals the subtle interplay between mental movement and physical action, showing us how true mastery emerges from inner stillness. This is Gut. A young feudal lord had developed a passionate interest in Zen practice alongside his traditional training in the martial arts. Bold and confident in his physical abilities, he had heard many stories about the legendary composure of Zen masters and decided to test whether such stories contained truth or merely legend. The lord had been studying with the renowned master Bankei, whose reputation for unshakable calm was known throughout the province. Sessions with the master always left the young man impressed by Bankei's serene presence, but a part of him wondered whether this tranquility could withstand genuine physical threat. One day, the Lord conceived what he considered a clever test of his teacher's enlightenment. During their usual meeting, as Master Bankai sat quietly in meditation, the young man suddenly drew his lance and thrust it directly toward the master's chest, hoping to catch him completely off guard. Without the slightest sign of alarm or hurried movement, Bankai calmly deflected the weapon with his prayer beads, redirecting the lance harmlessly to one side. His breathing remained steady, his expression unchanged, as if he had simply brushed away a persistent fly. The Lord froze, amazed by the master's response. He had expected either startled reflexes or perhaps fear, but instead witnessed movement that seemed to arise from perfect stillness. Bankai looked at his student with gentle eyes, showing no anger or surprise at the sudden attack. "Your technique is still immature," he said quietly. "Your mind moved first." The young lord lowered his weapon, suddenly understanding that the master had seen his intention long before his body had acted. The attack had been deflected not through superior reflexes, but through a quality of awareness that perceived and responded without mental agitation. "Master," the Lord asked, his voice filled with new respect, "how did you know what I was planning? I gave no outward sign of my intention." Bankai smiled. "When the mind becomes still, it perceives clearly. Your mind was filled with excitement about testing me, and this excitement was visible long before your lance moved. In true action, there is no gap between seeing and responding because there is no interference from mental commentary." The Buddha understood that all that we are is the result of what we have thought. This ancient wisdom illuminates how our mental states determine not only our actions, but our capacity for skillful response to life's challenges. Why do we struggle to act from stillness rather than mental agitation? Zen teachings reveal several patterns that interfere with natural responsiveness. Our minds constantly generate what might be called premeditation noise, the internal chatter of planning, anticipating, and rehearsing our actions. Like the young lord's excitement about testing his teacher, this mental activity actually slows our response time and reduces our effectiveness. We also habitually separate thinking from doing, creating an artificial gap between perception and action. In natural response, seeing and acting arise simultaneously from awareness itself, but we interrupt this flow by inserting layers of mental analysis and emotional reaction. This creates the delay that Bankai recognized in his student's attack. Additionally, we often confuse mental movement with preparation when, in fact, excessive thinking usually makes us less prepared rather than more. Like an athlete who overthinks their technique during competition, mental agitation interferes with the body's natural intelligence and creates tension that blocks skillful action. Consider how this pattern appears in daily life. During a difficult conversation, we might plan our responses while the other person speaks, missing important nuances and responding to what we expected them to say rather than what they actually said. While driving, we might become so caught up in thinking about our destination that we react slowly to immediate traffic conditions. In emergency situations, people who respond most effectively often report that they acted without thinking, not from unconsciousness, but from a clarity that transcended mental hesitation. This is the quality Bankai demonstrated, action arising directly from awareness without the interference of self-conscious deliberation. Zen Master Dogen taught, thinking and not thinking are not two different things. True stillness doesn't mean the absence of thought, but rather thoughts arising and passing without creating mental fixation or emotional turbulence. From this stillness, response becomes spontaneous and precisely appropriate to each situation. This principle applies equally to physical actions and mental responses. When someone criticizes us, do we react from the stillness of clear seeing or from the agitation of wounded pride? When opportunities arise, do we respond from inner clarity or from the excitement of anticipated gain? When challenges appear, do we act from calm assessment or from anxious projection? The young lord's immature technique wasn't about his martial arts training, but about his relationship to his own mind. As long as mental excitement preceded his actions, those actions would be telegraphed and predictable. Only when action arises from stillness does it become truly effective and appropriate. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." This inner peace isn't passive, but dynamically responsive, like a still lake that perfectly reflects everything while remaining undisturbed by what it shows. Practicing this quality of responsive stillness doesn't require years of meditation or martial arts training. It begins with noticing when mental agitation precedes our actions and learning to pause long enough for that agitation to settle. In that pause, natural intelligence can emerge and respond appropriately to whatever situation we face. Tonight, as you prepare for tomorrow's activities, can you sense the difference between planning that arises from clarity and mental movement that stems from anxiety or excitement? Can you imagine responding to life's challenges from the stillness that Bankai demonstrated, rather than the mental agitation that betrayed the young lord's intentions? As the Buddha taught, meditate, do not delay, lest you later regret it. The cultivation of inner stillness serves not only peace, but skillful action in every moment. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the fluid nature of circumstances and the wisdom of withholding judgment. This is the tale of an old farmer and the art of living with uncertainty. In a remote valley surrounded by rolling mountains, an elderly farmer lives with his adult son in a simple farmhouse that has sheltered their family for generations. Their life is modest but sufficient, sustained by a small plot of vegetables and their most valuable possession, a strong, reliable horse that helps with all the heavy work of farming and transportation. One morning, the farmer awakens to discover that the horse has disappeared during the night. The gate stands open, and there are no tracks indicating theft. The animal has simply wandered off into the vast wilderness beyond their valley. For a farming family, losing their only horse represents a catastrophic setback that threatens their livelihood and survival. Word of this misfortune spreads quickly through their small community. By afternoon, neighbors begin arriving to express their sympathy and support. "Oh, how terrible this is for you," they exclaim with genuine concern. "What dreadful luck! How will you manage the farm without your horse? This is truly a disaster." The old farmer listens to their well-meaning condolences with calm attention, then responds simply, "How do you know this is bad luck?" His neighbors exchange puzzled glances. Surely the loss of such an essential animal is obviously unfortunate. But the old man's serene expression reveals no trace of the distress they expect to see. He continues with his daily activities as if nothing particularly significant has occurred. The next morning brings an extraordinary development. The missing horse returns, not alone, but followed by a small herd of wild horses, magnificent, powerful animals that have chosen to follow the domestic horse back to the farm. The farmer and his son quickly construct temporary fencing to contain this unexpected windfall. The same neighbors who had offered sympathy now rush over to share in the celebration. "What incredible good fortune! they declare with excitement. You've gone from having one horse to owning an entire herd. This is the best luck anyone could imagine. You must be overjoyed by this blessing. Again, the old farmer listens thoughtfully to their enthusiastic congratulations before responding with the same calm curiosity. How do you know this is good luck? The following day, the farmer's son attempts to break one of the wild horses for riding. These animals, though beautiful, have never known human handling and resist fiercely. During the training session, the young man is thrown violently from the horse's back and suffers a severe break in his leg that leaves him unable to walk without assistance. Once more, the neighbors gather to offer their support in what appears to be another turn toward misfortune. How dreadful, they lament, shaking their heads at this latest setback. Just when things were looking so positive, this terrible accident happens. Your poor son, what bad luck has befallen your family again? The old farmer tends to his son's injury with gentle care while responding to their expressions of sympathy with familiar words. How do you know this is bad luck? Within days, their question finds an unexpected answer. Military officers arrive in the valley with orders to conscript all able-bodied young men for a dangerous war against northern invaders. Most of these soldiers will not return home alive. However, when they examine the farmer's son, his broken leg makes him unsuitable for military service. He remains safely at home while other families say goodbye to their children, perhaps forever. The Buddha taught, every blessing ignored becomes a curse. Every curse faced becomes a blessing. What emerges from this story is the profound wisdom of holding our judgments about circumstances lightly, recognizing that our perspective is always partial and temporary. Why do we rush to label experiences as fortunate or unfortunate when their ultimate meaning remains unknown? Buddhist psychology explains that our minds seek the comfort of quick categorization, preferring the illusion of understanding to the discomfort of uncertainty. We want to know immediately whether to celebrate or mourn, to relax or worry, to feel grateful or resentful. This mental habit of instant evaluation reflects a deeper pattern of trying to control our emotional responses by controlling our interpretations of events. If we can quickly determine that something is good or bad, we believe we know how to feel and what to expect. This provides temporary psychological relief, but often proves premature and misleading. The old farmer's repeated question, how do you know, points to what Buddhist philosophy calls don't know mind. This isn't ignorance, but wisdom, the recognition that reality unfolds in ways too complex and interconnected for our limited perspective to fully comprehend. What appears devastating in the moment may prove beneficial over time, while apparent blessings may carry hidden difficulties. Consider how many experiences in your own life have changed meaning as their consequences became clear. Perhaps a job rejection led to a better opportunity. Maybe a relationship ending created space for personal growth. Possibly an illness brought unexpected insights about what truly matters. The disappointment you felt at the time now seems misplaced given what followed. This doesn't mean we should become emotionally numb or stop having natural responses to events. The farmer certainly wanted his horse back and felt concern for his son's injury, but he distinguished between acknowledging immediate circumstances and creating elaborate stories about their ultimate significance. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught about beginner's mind, approaching each situation with fresh openness rather than predetermined assumptions about its meaning. When we practice this kind of mental flexibility, we become more resilient and responsive to changing conditions rather than rigid and reactive. The art of living that this story illustrates involves developing what Buddhists call equanimity, the capacity to remain present and responsive, regardless of whether circumstances align with our preferences. This isn't passive resignation, but dynamic engagement without attachment to specific outcomes. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron describes this as learning to stay with the experience, instead of immediately jumping to conclusions about what it means for our future happiness or security. When we can rest in not knowing, we often discover that our wisdom about how to respond emerges naturally from the situation itself. The farmer's approach also demonstrates tremendous faith, not in specific outcomes, but in the fundamental trustworthiness of life's process. He acts skillfully with whatever arises while remaining open to possibilities beyond his current understanding. Tonight, as you reflect on recent events you've labeled as fortunate or unfortunate, can you hold those judgments more lightly? Perhaps you'll discover that your peace of mind depends less on having good luck and more on developing the capacity to respond wisely to whatever unfolds. As the Buddha observed, everything changes. Nothing remains without change. This includes our interpretations of whether those changes serve our deepest welfare. Let us continue our journey with a story about the transformative power of fearlessness and unconditional compassion. This is the tale of the thief and the Zen master. One quiet evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Zen master Shichiri Kojun sat in his simple home, reciting ancient sutras. His voice flowed rhythmically through the peaceful rooms, each word a meditation, each breath a prayer. The soft glow of candlelight danced across the walls as he immersed himself completely in the sacred texts, finding deep tranquility in the familiar verses. Suddenly, the serenity was shattered. The front door burst open with a violent crash, and a desperate man entered, brandishing a sharp sword that gleamed menacingly in the candlelight. His eyes were wild with desperation, his clothes dirty and torn, his breathing heavy from running. He had clearly chosen this isolated house because he believed it would be an easy target. A peaceful monk would offer no resistance. "Money or your life?" the thief demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and aggression. He expected the old man to cower, to plead, to scramble frantically for whatever valuables he might have hidden away. But Shichiri didn't even look up from his sutra book. His voice remained calm and steady as he continued reciting for a moment before pausing to address the intruder. "Please don't disturb my practice," he said, with the same gentle tone he might use to ask someone to close a door. "If you need money, help yourself. It's in that drawer over there." He gestured casually toward a simple wooden chest, then immediately returned to his recitation as if nothing unusual had occurred. The thief stood frozen, his sword still raised, completely bewildered. In all his years of stealing, he had never encountered such a reaction. No fear, no pleading, no anger, just matter-of-fact helpfulness, as if he were a neighbor who had stopped by to borrow something. Shaking his head in confusion, but proceeding with his business, the thief moved to the indicated drawer and began gathering the coins and small valuables he found there. The soft sound of the master's voice continued behind him, reciting sacred words as peacefully as if he were alone. Just as the thief was preparing to leave with his stolen goods, the master's voice called out again. "Wait," Shichiri said, finally looking up from his book. "Please don't take everything. I need some of that money to pay my taxes tomorrow. Leave a little for me, won't you?" The thief stared at him in amazement. Here was a man who was being robbed, calmly negotiating the terms of his own robbery, as if they were conducting normal business. Almost without thinking, the thief returned some of the money to the drawer. As he turned to leave, certain that this strange encounter was finally over, the master's voice stopped him once more. "You took my money," Shichiri called out, his tone carrying a note of reproach. "And you didn't even thank me. That's quite rude, don't you think?" This final comment left the thief completely speechless. His sword hand began to shake. Never in his most violent encounters had he been so thoroughly unnerved. Here was a man who treated robbery as if it were a favor, who was more concerned about politeness than personal safety. Thank you," the thief stammered, and then fled into the night as quickly as his legs would carry him. Later, when the thief was caught and confessed to numerous crimes, including the incident at Shichiri's house, the master was called as a witness. The court officials expected him to demand justice, to describe the terror and violation he had experienced. Instead, Shichiri spoke with the same calm clarity he had shown that evening. "This man did not steal anything from me," he testified. "I gave him the money freely. He even thanked me for it, though it took a little reminding." The thief, sitting in chains, felt something break open in his chest as he heard these words. This man had not only shown him extraordinary kindness in the moment of the crime, but was now protecting him from the consequences. For the first time in years, tears came to his eyes. Not tears of self-pity or anger, but tears of recognition. He had encountered something he had never experienced before: love without conditions. Upon his release from prison, the former thief sought out the master and begged to become his student. Under Shichiri's patient guidance, he learned to cultivate the same fearless compassion he had witnessed that night. Years later, through dedicated practice and the master's unwavering belief in his potential for transformation, he attained the deep peace and wisdom of enlightenment. As the Buddha observed, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the revolutionary power of meeting violence with absolute peace, responding to taking with giving, and answering fear with love. Why do we instinctively believe that force must be met with force, that aggression requires defensive reaction? Zen Buddhism reveals that this pattern, while natural, often perpetuates the very conflicts it seeks to resolve. When we respond to hostility with hostility, we simply escalate the cycle of suffering. But when we respond with genuine compassion, not passive submission, but active love, we create space for transformation that wouldn't otherwise exist. Look deeply at your own experience. When someone approaches you with anger, criticism, or demand, what is your automatic response? Most of us immediately mobilize our defenses, preparing to protect ourselves through counterattack or withdrawal. But notice what happens in your body and mind during these defensive reactions. Does the tension decrease or increase? Does the conflict resolve or intensify? Shichiri's response demonstrates what Zen calls skillful means, acting from wisdom rather than reflex. His fearlessness didn't come from being unaware of danger, but from understanding something profound about the nature of reality. He recognized that the thief's aggression arose from desperation and suffering, not from inherent evil. By refusing to see him as an enemy, Shichiri created the possibility for the thief to see himself differently. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called the courage of defenselessness. This doesn't mean being naive about genuine danger or allowing ourselves to be harmed unnecessarily. Rather, it means developing the confidence to respond to difficult situations from our highest wisdom rather than our most primitive instincts. The Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Shichiri embodied all three in his encounter with the thief. He lived from complete presence, loved without conditions, and let go of any attachment to his possessions or even his personal safety. Consider the people in your life who challenge you: the difficult colleague, the critical family member, the aggressive driver in traffic. What would it mean to meet their energy with the same kind of fearless compassion Shichiri showed? Not by agreeing with them or submitting to their demands, but by refusing to match their level of reactivity, by staying connected to your own center of peace, regardless of their behavior. Tonight, as you encounter your own moments of tension or conflict, can you remember the master who treated a robber as an honored guest? Can you find the space between stimulus and response where choice lives? Where you can decide to meet aggression with peace, taking with giving, fear with love. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes the most powerful response to violence is simply to remain unshakable in our commitment to compassion, knowing that love has a transformative power that force can never match. As we bring our transformative journey to a gentle close tonight, can you feel how the freedom you've experienced isn't something you need to chase or achieve, but rather something that naturally emerges when you stop running from yourself? Can you sense that the profound liberation you've touched through these stories lives not in some distant future, but right here in your own awareness, patiently waiting for your recognition? The Buddha understood this when he said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." Reflecting on this wisdom, remember that the freedom you've been seeking doesn't require you to become someone different or fix everything that feels broken. It blossoms naturally from accepting yourself exactly as you are, with all your imperfections and struggles. Throughout tonight's journey, each story has revealed the same life-changing truth from different angles. That mental freedom comes not from controlling your thoughts, but from changing your relationship with them. That peace arises not from perfecting your circumstances, but from releasing your grip on how things should be. That true liberation happens not when you finally get everything right, but when you stop exhausting yourself, trying to be anything other than what you already are. Even when old patterns resurface tomorrow, even when familiar anxieties return, the wisdom you've absorbed tonight has taken root in the depths of your understanding. These teachings will continue working within you, gently loosening the mental knots that have kept you bound, quietly dissolving the fears that have held you back. These ancient teachings remind us that the freedom we long for isn't hidden in complex philosophies or distant mountain retreats. It's available right now in the simple act of accepting this moment, without needing it to be different. Tonight, you've tasted that freedom, and now it lives within you as a constant possibility. As you drift into restorative sleep, carry with you not just these stories, but the profound sense of liberation they've awakened. May this freedom guide you through each day ahead, reminding you that peace is always just one accepting breath away. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk.